can we all just take a step back and realise something huge? What just happened? No, I'm not talking about the Verstappen-Norris thing. I'm talking about the fact that Ferrari bagged a 1-2. Yeah, we barely saw it happen, but Leclerc and Sainz were really on fire this weekend. And by the way, he did it again. Now, I had to keep reminding myself that the battle for the lead was not between Verstappen and Norris, but instead, that battle wasn't really much of one between Sainz and Leclerc. But does that really matter? Ferrari scored maximum points on Sunday, save for Ocon getting the fastest lap. And what really helped Ferrari was that both drivers, over the course of the entire weekend, were really strong. Whilst on Saturday, Carlos was the stronger of the two, when it came to race day, Charles was just on a whole other level. We all expected Verstappen and Norris to be able to tangle with one another into turn 1. Well, they did, but none of us expected that Charles would have enough pace and the gumption just to be able to go around the outside and go, okay, I'll have that, thank you. And then it was like, Chuck, that wasn't in the script! Yeah, throughout the race he completely flipped that script alongside with the Spaniards' own efforts. So yeah, they're on top of Red Bull and the Constructors for sure, and now people are looking to them to perhaps beat McLaren. Now, you might be thinking, Law, you're a McLaren fan. You don't want Ferrari to win. You don't want them to be battling McLaren. No, I do. I want them to be battling for this Constructors. It just feels right. This has been a battle that has been brewing for half a century. Ferrari and McLaren going at each other in the championships, be it drivers or constructors, yeah, bring it on. And not only did Ferrari have excellent pace, but in both the sprint and the race, the drivers completely made the most of the fact that the two title challengers were absorbed with one another, and so both of them could catch them unawares. These moments will really be crucial for this team, and Leclerc knows it. And already, we're only into the first race of this particular triple header, and Charles has scored now more than double the points that he did in the mid-season triple header, which already is going to make him smile. Oh, and by the way, according to some reports, they didn't bring all of their upgrades to Austin, and they may be bringing off the rest of them for Mexico. So maybe Ferrari might be even more competitive. And if you were confused as to why we didn't get those weird Mickey Mouse bear trophies on the podium, we just got like a standard, nice looking one, but pretty generic. Apparently it was down to a copyright infringement claim, cease and desist from Bear Brick, not Disney, because Mickey Mouse and stuff. They make these vinyl collectible bear figures or something. I got that from a shout out from Coffee Corner Motorsport, by the way, so big shout out to them on Threads, which I am on, by the way. If it were up to me, I just don't understand why Coda doesn't make a replica of its famous distinctive tower as the trophy, but hey-ho, doesn't really matter because Ferrari, they were the class of the field and we barely got to see it. One thing is for sure though, Charles is going to make the Ferrari dynamic with Lewis really interesting to watch, and I did put out a poll on my socials saying whether or not Lewis should be really happy that Ferrari's quick or a little bit concerned that Charles is quick. Maybe it's a mixture of both. But I'll tell you one thing, is that in terms of Austin, even though Ferrari are really good, the other Ferrari-powered team, that isn't Sauber, did almost as well. In fact, getting their best result in North America that they've ever had. And also, this is the longest point streak that Haas has ever had since 2018. 4 races on the trot now, a Haas driver has either scored or both of them have scored. And it was so close to being another double points finish. Magnussen was really competitive. They were able to make the undercut work really well, and at one point, Kevin was in contention for 6th place. That would have been absolutely bonkers, and had they got that, 8 extra points, they would now be starting to mount a really compelling campaign to give Aston Martin a bit of a brown trousers moment. But unfortunately, supposedly, it was down to the fact that they got onto the radio urgently to Kevin to box in immediately. So I think probably they were trying to go for a one-stop, but it didn't work out, and that Kevin was about to violently head over the cliff in terms of tyres, but Hulkenberg ultimately got 8th place on the road, so this is something to be really pleased about. And not to mention, both Haas's were looking composed and really managed to give Sergio Perez a lot of trouble. And it really just made you think that, really, can they increase their points in Mexico? Well, the last time they scored there was back in 2017, so it's not likely, but who knows? Haas is completely blowing away expectations at this point. And Nico? Well, I think he wants to lock out his place in the top 10 for the driver standings. That'll be a nice little bargaining chip over Lance Stroll. And then there's Max Verstappen. It may not have been a win in the main race, but getting a sprint win and extending his lead in the championship, that was the objective for the weekend really, even though Ferrari just completely looked miles away from Red Bull. And also, Max had the complete upgrades package, whereas Checo had most of the parts, I think, maybe at least half of them. So finally, Helmut Marko was right, that the Austin upgrades would actually yield something for Red Bull that wasn't either just going sideways or be a complete and utter dud. So okay, Red Bull has now got an upgrade which will now make things really interesting going into the final races of the season. And yes, they've been able to completely get themselves away from the front bib saga, so that's been completely forgotten. Whether it's the ultimate solution for their mid-season slump, it remains to be seen. We need to see what happens in Mexico. But this was the start Max needed, and fair play to him. And even though he's a tenacious driver and he wants to go flat out to win races, he's changed his mood in recent outings. I certainly think that after the Hungarian Grand Prix, when he really did fly off the handle, he started to become a little bit more circumspect. He's now starting to think more about damage limitation, and even though it might not be seemingly Max's style to not go all out to win a race, he was thinking, yeah, third place is actually the best I can get, and he ultimately got third place, and he did score more points than Lando. And he also didn't get too ragged with Lando, which subsequently gave us a very thrilling battle between the two of them, which was cleaner than in Austria, but like Austria, ended with a controversial move, which has got people talking, and it's sort of soured the experience, but hey, it was fun while it lasted. Now it's time to discuss rookies. Now you might argue that Liam isn't a rookie anymore since we saw him last year, but remember, this is only his 6th Grand Prix, and his first race back in nearly a year, and he's managed to bag 9th place, equaling his best ever result. So even though people are still a little bit salty about Daniel Ricciardo being replaced mid-season by Liam Lawson, in terms of the actual practicalities of it, VCARB have been justified in doing the deed. As far as I'm concerned, Liam just did the basics of what he needed to do. Already in this first race of 6, people are now going, okay, Liam's actually quite legit, and that's going to take a huge amount of pressure off his shoulders. Had he not scored, it would have been a bit tougher, but 9th place, VCARB right now, they will take that with both hands. They will be very grateful for that if they want to try and mount a fight back against Haas, but the momentum right now, well, VCARB's going to need a really massive upgrade that works and to improve their strategies if they want to have any hope of beating Haas now, because Haas right now, well, as according to the memes, they're getting gritty. And then there's Colapinto. Wow, this guy is just something else. And okay, I won't beat about the bush. Here we go. All right, here we go. Froth. No, froth. Ah! Here goes, Franco. Thanks again. Anyway. Seriously though, the momentum behind Franco is crazy. He was really calming the jitters of the team, who at one point were looking at Gasly, who qualified 6th ultimately, and that Alpine were about to take back 8th in the Constructors, but instead, Alpine didn't score at all, and they came away with a point, Williams, in unexpected circumstances, given that Franco started 15th. And seriously, at one point, Franco was odds on to be getting the fastest lap, and none of the cameras were showing it. That was absolutely insane in itself. Not even like the mini camera or something like that. But yeah, Franco almost had that lap, but then Ocon took it because Alpine were obviously wanting to limit the damage that Williams could have wielded because, you know, they're looking for 8th in the Constructors and they want to defend it. But Franco did the business at a moment when, if this had been a few races ago and Sargent were around, and Albon had all of the calamities and mistakes that he had, it would have been completely hopeless for Williams. Whereas Franco, he's giving the team some hope, and really making James Vowles have, as James May would say, the fizz. But it makes me really want to see a battle between Liam and Franco. He was almost in DRS range, and maybe even Hulkenberg would have been paying close attention to his mirrors had Franco gotten past. But whatever. What's become clear is that Colapinto is learning fast, and the battles that we did see on track were mature, composed, and of course we got to see another one between Franco and Checo. This is the kid's 4th race, and that's bonkers. He's only 21. He's gonna be back. There is no way that there is a reality that we are living in, that Franco is just here, he doesn't elaborate, and then just leaves, never to be seen again. No, that ain't happening. Because we have to remember that Williams is a meritocracy. That's what cost Logan his seat, and next year is going to be very, very interesting. I'll touch upon that later when I talk about Alex, and you might guess which section he's in. Then we get to the mess section, for drivers who weren't exactly great, but nor were they exactly bad, and this is where Lando Norris goes. I will put him here simply for the fact that the battle that he had with Verstappen was textbook right up until the move which ultimately got him a 5-second penalty for track limits, but they were marred with some other little mistakes as well, which did cost him places too. It's a little bit of a nuanced mixed bag, because you got to admit that there were moments when Lando was looking really, really calm and mature, and that he was learning fast in how to deal with Max Verstappen. We got a really good battle which emulated Austria and almost perfected it. It was like what we should have seen in Austria going all the way. Lando trying things, making Max really sweat and lock up his tyres. That was really, really good. But unfortunately, like in Spielberg, we just got a really bad ending which soured the taste, and now people are talking about it ad nauseum. And I know that many people are going to be wanting to know what I think about all of this, but ultimately, I'm kind of sitting on the fence on this one. And Lando stands by the decision to push ahead, and he only lost out by 9/10, so hindsight being a handy thing, maybe they shouldn't have done that, but ultimately they were close to pulling it off and rendering the potential penalty moot. And had they done that, people wouldn't be talking about it. You might be thinking, on reflection, that maybe Lando should give him the place back, given the fact that the tyre delta between these two drivers was really, really good. Lando could have easily overtaken him back because Max's tyres were starting to go off, and he did fall back 4 seconds in like 3 or 4 laps. Max could have probably lost that place again had Lando done it, but again, McLaren and Lando were fired up, and they felt like now that he had actually popped the cork or what have you, they would have been able to get far enough ahead, and Piastri was not too far behind. But this is where I'm going to have to get the thumb of doubt out here. Given the fervour and the war of words between Christian Horner and Zach Brown, and the fact that there have been recent events where Zach and Andrea have been supporting Lando, and then Lando walks a lot of stuff back, that maybe Norris was feeling that if he hadn't done what he did and instead gave the place back, that his bosses would have been disappointed in him for not fighting, and therefore he had no choice but to do it. But again, this is speculation and conjecture. I'm not a mind reader. But then there's the matter of all the other little things throughout the weekend, which were a little bit... sure, Lando jumping up to second in the sprint at the start was really good. But looking up at the last lap, at the last minute of the sprint, and allowing one Ferrari, Carlos, to get through, that was not so good. Sure, Lando getting pole position and making most of the fact that George Russell curtailed Q3. That was great. Him having good battle with Max. That was good too. But unfortunately, not too long after the start, not only does he lose out from first position, but then he falls back to 4th behind both Ferraris. That's not so good. Granted, McLaren weren't expecting to be the fastest team. They thought it was going to be very, very close between the top 3 teams. And I'm also pretty sure that McLaren were hoping they were pinning their ideals on Max's supposed issue that might have required a reset in the pits to have been longer than it actually was, or maybe curtailed his race entirely. Maybe they're hoping it might manifest itself at another circuit or something, that this might have just been a band-aid situation, and therefore it might lead to a DNF, which might put Lando back in play. But it still remains to be seen. This is not great. We've got 5 races to go. Lando really needs to outshine and do more performances that Charles did over Max than what Lando's been able to do. Because let's remember, Charles took away 10 points from Max in the Grand Prix, and that's exactly what Lando needs to be doing right now. And yeah, you might be thinking that McLaren really shouldn't have brought these upgrades to a sprint weekend, but maybe this was intentional. Maybe they knew that they weren't going to be that great in Austin, so it's best to dial it in here sooner than later, and then have a completely understood or at least slightly more mastered car in Mexico, but oh well. And then I know, you're probably surprised about Russell being here. You think he'd be a loser. But given that George crashed in Q3 and Mercedes updates weren't the shot in the arm they needed if they wanted to figure in securing wins this year, out of the 2 Mercedes drivers, George was the one that brought home the most points. And it was also a major scalp against Lewis Hamilton because this is a track that he adores. And ultimately, Lewis didn't finish the race. I don't think he even got past lap 2. And yes, Mercedes can take a crumb of comfort for the fact that both drivers started from the pit lane and both drivers were clawing their way back through the positions really, really quickly. There is some potential in the W15, but it's still a little bit muddied. It's too early to say. Maybe we might see more in Mexico City or something like that. But at this moment, George did what he needed to do to try and really establish a position, a campaign, a mission to finish ahead of Lewis Hamilton in the championship. There's only 10 points between them, actually, and George was still able to get a good chunk of points ahead of his teammate and at least try and get some sort of assurance ready for 2025 when the concept of this car will remain the same. But yeah, it does kind of cement that this team is in 4th place. They're nowhere near the top 3. They're in a league of their own. And George, he did have a good race, which was tempered with his starting position, but everything came to him when it needed to, and he was competitive in individual battles and getting one over Sergio. So yeah, it wasn't a great race for Mercedes, but at least it was okay. There was something to be happy about, and that car can claw its way through the field. And I will put Gasly here because we have to remember, that qualifying effort, that was monumental. It was even more valiant than what he did last year, getting a similar position, but it was one thing after another for Pierre this weekend, wasn't it? After a brilliant qualifying, the race was riddled with bad luck, as well as him getting a track limits violation. It was scrappy, and it truly frustrated Gasly. And yeah, Ocon does deserve a little bit of a cameo mention here, because he did get the fastest lap and what have you. There were moments in the race that Alpine looked competitive. It was hanging in there in the top 10 for a really long time, only being undermined by Magnussen getting the undercut, and then losing loads and loads of time with the particular tyre strategy. It was just unfortunate, but they did bring updates to this track, Alpine, which did work, and these are quite fundamental big ones. These are to the floor, the engine cover, and the rear wing, so the entire back end of the car has been modified, and it does give the team some hope that if they want to try and get 8th back in the Constructors, then they can, or it's a good baseline for 2025, so they don't end up being plumb last at the beginning of the season. And I think Alpine can take some comfort in the fact that there's been no dramas for the last couple of months. It's actually been quite plain sailing. It's quiet at the back, sure, and there was a lot of ridicule for their special Indiana Jones livery, in that it did look like a McLaren car from a distance, and I saw the commentators do that many times. But Oliver Oakes, he's a really good guy. He seems to be a calming influence, even with Flavio Briatore in the background. And there's of course that threat from a strike for the engine base, that still looms large, so a little bit tricky. And then, yeah, Piastri's here, because this is pretty much what I reckoned Oscar would get. I predicted 5th, and he got 5th. I wasn't blown away by him last year, and nor was I blown away here this year. This is probably one of his bogey tracks. Having said that though, even though he did start 16th in the sprint due to a track limits issue, he did do a good job in clawing his way back up to 10th. He wasn't too far away from the points, so there was some potential here, but with this McLaren, and with Piastri, with his previous experience at COTA, it's not exactly stellar. And in the race, he was just sort of nowhere. He admits that it was a pretty lonely race and that there wasn't really much to be had. There could have been an opportunity if both Verstappen and Norris took each other out or compromised their race. He could have slipped by both of them to get a podium, but it wasn't looking likely. He did get close to within like 3 seconds of Lando and Max, but it wasn't enough to really be able to make the most of it, and nor did I have confidence that Oscar would be able to do it. You might be thinking I'm downing on the kid, especially since he's my boy, but I have to be realistic here. I have to limit my expectations, considering I am a fan of his. At least he stayed where he started, and he did help extend the lead over Red Bull, so he did do his part, albeit very slightly. Because especially now there's Ferrari looming in the background, he does have to step up. So yeah, the race was fine, but nothing spectacular. And now we get to the losers, and I looked back as best as I could, and Lewis was right. He has never spun like this in a race before. There have been near spins, but nothing like this, diagnosed apparently by an errant gust of wind. And this isn't a case of Lewis over-exaggerating or making stuff up, no. These gusts of wind have been problematic for all the drivers throughout the entire weekend, especially at Big Red, which is turn 1, and at turn 19. It did happen, and that's exactly the same thing that happened with George. And this might be an issue fundamentally with the W15, that crosswinds might be a real major issue. And then you've also got to take into account that Lewis, he started from the pit lane, just like with George, and he was even more impressive than Russell. He got up to 12th place before he span out of the race. It would make me really seriously think that he might have been Lewis odds on for getting into the top 5 and maybe getting past Oscar near the end of the race or something. He really did have the potential. I mean, he just sounded utterly shocked and depressed that he obviously couldn't finish the race. This is one of his favourites, and he didn't even get past the first couple of laps, and it's just a bit of a shocker. I'm really stunned. But then you have to look back to Q1. You have to look back at, yeah, he got a track limits issue, and even if he hadn't done that, if that lap time had not been deleted, he wouldn't have gotten out of Q1 anyway, because it was 16th. That's crazy. But I seriously think that Lewis really needs to step up if he wants to finish his time with Mercedes, proving a point to Russell that, hey, he still had it, and if he just wants to give Ferrari the impression that he is a worthy candidate to replace Carlos. I feel like he is. Of course he will be. From the bottom line, definitely. And in terms of being able to G up the team, absolutely. But these are not the kind of results that Lewis needs, especially since Charles went on to win the race. And then there's Alex Albon. Oh boy. If Alex wasn't sweating buckets before Austin, he should be sweating buckets now. And I will preface this by saying he did spin in qualifying, and he did get damage early in the race, which really compromised his efforts, but that's exactly my point. It's these kind of mistakes and unfortunate circumstances which is allowing Franco Colapinto to really shine, if not more so, because Franco's weekend was completely and utterly clean. Yeah, sure, he didn't get out of Q1 like Albon, but at least he was able to get to 15th and he clawed his way up to the front. He got in for points and maybe the fastest lap. There were really good positive moments for Franco, whereas with Alex, there wasn't really anything to be happy about. All that Alex could do after his tangle with Ocon was to help out his teammate wherever he could to make sure the team came away with a point and prevented Alpine from taking traction away from them. And with support for Franco growing with every race, and the next 2 races probably seeing a huge in-house contingent of fans from Argentina and nearby countries in attendance, Albon is going to be on the back foot. Even now, throughout social media, I'm seeing more and more questions being raised regarding Albon's potential. I'm even seeing the fraud label being bandied about, which is absolutely crazy. And I think that is a little bit premature, because let's remember, Alex Albon came at a time in Williams' history and future that it looked really, really precarious. Alex was a stabilising force, and his efforts in trying to sustain Williams' future should not be discounted. But given that James Vowles is seriously transforming the team into something completely different, this might be the beginnings of a brand new chapter of the team, which Alex might not be a part of, considering how much James is bigging up Carlos and how much he's bigging up Franco. I still seriously think that Franco might be better suited to not go to Sauber, where he might just drown in the back and nobody paying attention to him, and instead he might be better suited to being right there, in the mix at Williams as their reserve driver for next year, and ready to leap or pounce at an opportunity should, at the end of next year when Alex's contract is up for renewal, James does not extend it because Carlos might be running rings around the Thai driver. I'm not sure whether or not I want that to happen. Alex might be really suited to Williamson, but the fact is, though, is that James wants the best lineup he can possibly get. Carlos, he's going to be there for the next 2, 3, 4 years. And Franco, again, he's only 21, and he's really suiting that team quite nicely. Franco is a brilliant halo driver for that movement. Vowles wants a good driver academy. Colapinto would be the best example, and Alex might not be part of it. So Alex really needs to step up in these next few races, but I feel like the momentum is turning away from him, because otherwise it's just going to raise more and more questions, and I don't think that's what he needs. This was not a good race for him. And then there's Perez. Granted, it could have been worse. At some points it was looking like he would have been 9th, since Tsunoda and Colapinto were both successful in holding the Mexican back for longer than was ideal. But nevertheless, 7th place was still not enough to really turn the tide away from McLaren and try and claw back some of the deficit they have to the Woking team. And now, then there's Ferrari in contention, them scoring 26 more points than Red Bull. Now, I've got to preface this. To be fair, Sergio was not running the fully upgraded car. He was in a mixture, a mishmash, so he was limited in what he could do. He was held up by a couple of drivers, yes, and then apparently he was suffering from graining and a bit of balance issues, so the issues of the car hadn't been fully perfected, but it was enough for Max to be able to do the deal and at least get a podium, but certainly nowhere near the Ferraris. But this is still not enough for Checo. He needs to, when he gets to having a fully upgraded car, hopefully for Mexico, because if he didn't, then I'm pretty sure a lot of questions would be asked and Red Bull would not be popular in Mexico City. I feel like this is just not the thing that Checo needed right now. Sure, the debate about his future, I really don't want to get into. I'm just really bored about it at this point. But at the moment, Sergio is just not doing enough to bolster any confidence in him. Once he gets this upgraded car, he needs to be scoring top 5 finishes at minimum, and Ferrari's success in Austin needs to have been a flash in the pan. And speaking of pans, I think it didn't pan out so well for Yuki this race. At one point, he was looking to bag 8th place and really do one over Lawson, but then he got a track limits penalty, he had the spin, as well as him being the alternate strategy to Lawson, which turned out to be quite potent actually, and that really gave first blood to the Kiwi. And also, I'm really starting to see very, very little in terms of interest in Yuki Tsunoda being alongside Max Verstappen. The commentators were not talking about Yuki being there at all. They were just talking about, yeah, I see Liam in that car next year. What? No! It's just not right. It's not fair. But you do get the feeling that Honda is really now starting to push for Yuki to at least do a tyre test in the RB20 to prove their point that he is worth it. But it does make me think, if Honda can't win the war of words with Red Bull to give Yuki a tyre test in the current car, then maybe they might be more active in pushing for Yuki to be involved in the Aston Martin partnership for 2026. Whether or not it leads to him replacing Stroll or Fernando and what have you in the next couple of years, I don't know. But the fact is, though, it does make me think that Yuki, he will be at least a reserve driver at Aston Martin and will be very active in Honda's efforts and campaigns and loads of social media engagements for the team. So, I'm sorry, Felipe Drugovich, I think your days might be numbered because I think Yuki might get your seat. But speaking of Aston Martin, this was shocking. Absolutely shocking. The Honda partnership cannot come soon enough, and Fernando will be chomping at the bit for Adrian Newey's first day. He will be kissing that man on his first day the moment he walks in that office, seriously. This was absolutely nowhere for this team. Remember, they brought a lot of upgrades. The Aston Martin car is the most developed car on the grid by some margin, and it's yielded nothing. Nothing at all. It's crazy. Both drivers have condemned the updates and say the car is not good enough. And they should be counting their lucky stars that they had a solid start at the beginning, and they were getting the odd 6th or 8th here and there, thanks to Alonso mostly, and that was enough to make sure the teams behind them would not become a threat. But that really doesn't matter at this point. In terms of the principle, they are being outclassed by teams who are much smaller than them, and their facilities are far more basic. They are not state-of-the-art. Yes, Haas and Williams will catch up eventually, but right now, Haas, Williams, they are outperforming Aston Martin, and it's an utter embarrassment. I mean, yes, this is only a temporary situation. Honda will come in and improve the situation. Aramco will. But right now, it's probably not fun being an Aston Martin employee. And another team who had brought updates which ultimately came up with nothing to show for it was Sauber. Granted, Zhou had managed to clamber up to 12th or something like that, but then he spun into turn 1 and that sent him back to last, so much for that then. But according to both drivers, including Bottas, in particular Bottas, the updates had done something to the car, in that at the beginning of their stints, they were at least good enough with their competitors to at least not completely fall away, which is at least something and some hope for next year. Unfortunately, much like what Haas had to deal with last year, is that toward the end of their stints, the car would just simply fall off, the tyres would be baked, and that they just could do nothing with it, and that if they wanted to try a one-stop strategy, good luck with that. And considering the one-stop strategy turned out to be a slightly faster solution, this was just not what Sauber needed right now. But at least there is something to pin their hopes on for the future races of this season and maybe next year. But I don't think either driver will be around to see them, and especially if Alpine's progress continues. Much like how progress at Haas has proven to be alive and well. Now with the Toyota backing being made official, who's to say where the team will be come 2026? And to find out why I think the Haas-Toyota partnership is a lot bigger than you might be thinking, go and watch this video next, because it's a lot more nuanced and interesting.